In this video we'll show you how to replace the rear brake pads and service your rear brake. So this time we're going to fit our upgraded HH rear pads, the high performance pads, and we're going to clean around the brakes, clean the pistons, grease the sliders and just generally service the rear brake. So the tools you'll need are a 6mm Allen key, a 5mm Allen key, a PH3 screwdriver, a small flat bladed screwdriver, a 19mm spanner, a 17mm socket and a torque wrench. And also, it's not required, but a mallet makes it handy as well. So if you're servicing your rear brake, the tools you'll need are some maintenance spray, some brake cleaner, a toothbrush, an old rag, some paper towel, leading grease, copper grease and internal piston pliers. Also, it's not required, but piston retracting tool and wire brush make life easier as well. First, start by loosening the brake pins with a 5mm Allen key. Now, remove the little rubber cap with a small flat screwdriver. Loosen the front slider with a 6mm Allen key. Then slacken the rear axle with a 17mm socket on one side and a 19mm spanner to hold the nut on the other side. Now you can put the bike on its centre stand or paddock stand. At this point, it's easier if you remove the chain guard. Now remove the rear axle nut and slide the axle out. Unhook the chain, then slide the rear caliper out of the way. Now you can move the wheel out of the way. You can remove the brake pins with a 5mm Allen key. You can now remove the rear brake pads. You'll probably find that the metal pad spring will fall out. If you're just replacing the pads, you can skip some of this video to when we're installing the pads. Now undo the front brake slider from the carrier with a 6mm Allen key. Now you can remove the carrier from the caliper. Next, take the slider out of the caliper so we can clean and grease it. These are prone to seize in place. Then remove the rubber sleeve from the caliper. Now pump the rear brake pedal a little bit just to push the pistons out slightly. This helps you to clean the piston and free it up. Now we're cleaning the piston. Get a rag and hold the caliper with it, then squirt some maintenance spray on the piston. Then get something like an old toothbrush and clean round the piston with it. Give it a good scrub. If there's any rust on the piston, you can scrape it off carefully with a flathead screwdriver. Using some internal piston pliers, rotate the piston. This is partly to free it up and partly to access the other side for cleaning. Once it's clean, wipe the piston dry, then use a piston retracting tool to push the piston back. If you don't have one, you should be able to do it by hand by pressing with your thumbs. Now wipe the caliper dry and make sure all the maintenance spray is gone. Next, clean the brake pins. If they've got any surface rust on them, you can clean it off with a wire brush. Put a small amount of copper grease on the pins and on the threads. This next part can be a little fiddly. Insert the brake pad spring at the back of the caliper so that the centre of the spring sticks up slightly. The reason for the spring is so that the pads push against the middle and it stops them from rattling round. Now put the pins in just slightly to hold them in place. Then fit the first pad so that the pad material faces the inside of the caliper. You'll have to push the pad down a little to line the pins up. I find pushing one pin in first to hold the pad in place, then fitting the second pin works best for me. Now fit the second pad so that the pad material faces the inside of the caliper. Push it down to line the pins up and push the pins in all the way. Using a 5mm Allen key, tighten the pins up. They don't need to be tight, you can do this once the bike's assembled. If the pads end up too close together, just separate them so they're flush against the caliper and you have a gap for the brake disc. Next you want to grease both the sliders with some lithium grease. Fit the rubber sleeve back onto the caliper, ensuring that it lips on the little grooves on the caliper. Now put the slider that goes into the caliper in. This can be quite fiddly, as you want to ensure the lip on the slider seats onto the rubber sleeve. Then fit the little spring washer that usually falls out on the slider. Now we're fitting the carrier back on. First you want to fit the slider into the rubber boot, then line up the thread with the other slider. Nip the slider up onto the carrier with a 6mm Allen key. Make sure you wipe off any excess grease with some paper towels and ensure the caliper is dry. Clean and grease the axle ready for installation. Now I actually forgot to record this bit, but spray some brake clean on the brake disc and wipe it clean with some paper towel. First put the wheel loosely in place, then fit the wheel spacers on either side of the wheel, the large one on the left and the small one on the right. Push the wheel forward so you can hook the chain over. Next put the caliper over the disc, ensuring the disc is between each brake pad. A second person is much easier here. You want to put the left chain tensioner on, then slide the axle in part way. Then ensure the brake carrier is inserted into the lip on the swing arm and the wheel is lined up. Then fit the right chain tensioner on. You should be able to slide the axle all the way through now. It's usually easier if you use a rubber mallet. Next, thread the nut back on. While slightly pushing the wheel forward, torque the axle up to 70 Newton meters with a 17mm socket. Then tighten the slider up with a 6mm Allen key. Then put the rubber cap back on. Using a 5mm Allen key, tighten the pins back up. Finally, keep pumping the brake until the brake properly applies. Then test everything works. Make sure the brake's nice and free and applies properly. And that's it, your job's done. You've now got a good set of quality brake pads that'll outperform the OEM ones, last longer and are much better. So don't forget to like, subscribe and hit the bell icon for notifications.